Yes, this is right. This is
Okay, good evening, everybody. I will call to order the second monthly meeting of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees. Trustee Hannon is supposedly en route, but we will not hold up the show for him. Are there any changes, additions, or deletions to the agenda?
I had a tree conversation I want to touch on briefly that I was thinking I would do in conjunction with the ETC, the green area.
Okay.
I was going to add just a brief touch on the affordable housing conversation with the county that I had as part of the draft that I revision.
Okay, anything else? Hearing none, then we'll move right along to item number 3 on the agenda, which is a presentation from MRB Group about the drainage study that was done on the Larchmont Tamarack area, and turn it over to you, Matt.
Thanks, Ren. Hi, I'm Matt McKenna with MRB Group. Some of your faces are familiar from our walkthrough in the field related to the Larchmont.
Hey, Matt, sorry to interrupt, but can you use them? Can you bring the mic over just so the people on the live stream can hear you?
Another back on you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here. Matt McKenna with MRB Group. We've been involved in looking at various stormwater areas throughout the village over several years, and one area that continues to come up has been the Larchmont Drive area, and several of you have talked to MRB, talked to the village, told us about the issues you're having, issues related to your neighbors, and how the whole picture comes together. What the village has asked us to do and what we have done a preliminary conceptual evaluation of is we had a kickoff here with the town, the village, and then got out in the field and walked the properties, heard from you folks. And generally consensus is there's a single point of outlet in this area where stormwater is conveyed to, whether it's to the west, heading towards Pennsylvania Ave, that flows downhill towards this outlet, or also areas, properties to the east of 110 Larchmont area, in the north side of Larchmont Drive that convey their stormwater to the single outlet. Once stormwater makes its way onto these southern properties, residential boundaries, topography is really not in your benefit at that point. We're at a low point in the village, generally a wet area, just from the times we've been out there. There are some stormwater ponds or retention ponds further south near County Ulysses. It appears that some connection, high water overflow to feed into those ponds was once intended. Doesn't work today, you know, that's to be determined. So MRB was brought into the equation by the village to see what solutions do we have? What can we do that would accommodate everyone, broad picture? And we looked at several options so that we can weigh out the options for you as the residents of the village board to understand what solutions. There were 4 solutions that we developed, not to say that that's all the solutions that there could be, but I'll briefly walk through those 4 solutions, and one being the first one, option 1, and the report we've developed is listed on the village website. Is to install an outlet pipe or a drainage pipe along the southern boundary of those properties, with the town and village boundary as well, to keep in mind, heading due east towards, South Street Extension. What this option does is obviously it takes the stormwater that makes its way to the back of those properties, and it gets it out of those properties rather than sitting and being stagnant or having no place to be alleviated to. Some things to keep in mind here is we're not capturing all the flow before it gets onto these properties, right? We're dealing with it once it's there. So that's something that we, as engineers, wanted to consider and what the benefit is to that. Obviously, it's a low point, right? So any water that's on your property or on the property would be able to be conveyed out elsewhere downstream, so to speak. Some other things to keep in mind here from the village's perspective, and the DPW, I see Dusty in the corner over there, is, now, access to this pipe for maintenance becomes a little bit more cumbersome than saying a piece of pipe or catch basins that are located in the right of way where the village has access to that. So obviously, when we're looking at these alternatives, we want to think about easement, maintenance, operation, longevity. With that, easements would likely need to be maintained or acquired by the village so that they do have the access to upkeep and maintenance part of it. Once, the pipe conveyed east would now become part of the kind of Ulysses and kind of Ulysses land. Overall, in the grand scheme of things, an intermunicipal agreement or joint cooperation would be required here in any of these situations that were looked at, and that's why we looked at keeping the conversations open with the town when we started this conversation. Further heading east, on property 474 South Street is a natural or man-made drainage swell that continues the movement of stormwater to the southeast before crossing the South Street Extension. Via 24-inch culvert, which then discharges and flows down to a low-lying area and ultimately to Concrete Creek, if I'm not misspeaking there. So we're going to pause there on option one to see if there's any questions from the board or keep going. Option two then becomes a little bit more involved. Not so much that we're adding a significant amount more of pipe, but we have road driveway crossings. We have a bigger size pipe, some catch basins that would be including so that we're capturing any surface water flow, anything that's sheeting across the ground. A catch basin would pick that water up, get it into the pipe, and out that pipe would carry the stormwater. So under option two, we propose to install pipe and catch basins within the village right away. Heading from approximately 110, 112 Larchmont Drive, where that single pipe comes across, and all that water is coming together, collect it, convey it along to the east within the right of way, heading south and following a similar alignment prior to getting to the drainage swell. Obviously, again, easements would need to be maintained, would need to be required for construction as well as access and operation and maintenance. But the benefit and the true benefit here is that we're capturing the water, all the water that's conveyed here, we're captured before it made its way onto the property. So any remaining water would be any stormwater that's coming from your downspouts. If you have a sump pump discharge that goes to your backyard, that obviously wouldn't be captured. You're pumping groundwater at that point. So the intent and purpose of option two is that we want to get the stormwater and we want to capture it and we want to convey it before it gets to your individual properties. The other benefit, and major benefit here, is that it's the majority of it's within the village right away. And that provides easy roadside access to maintenance, upkeep, keeping an eye on it, or plugs, things like that, that the village can have good maintenance provisions for. So again, with the property generally sloping backwards down to the south, we have positive drainage to get that stormwater. We can maintain the slope. We can really get through a lot of design considerations when we're looking at this to actively get the stormwater off those properties and downstream. Same thing here with option one and option two, when we're taking a look at this big picture, where we do outlet, there's quite a bit of drop off with that pipe. So from the village's perspective and undertaking and working with the town, we want to make sure that there's proper provisions so that we're not continuing to erode that area. So we want to have some way to dissipate the energy, whether it's big riprap, stone, whatever it may be, so that we have proper working agreement there, not making conditions worse down. Option three that we looked at, and ultimately really not a viable option, is we looked at using the two existing stormwater ponds. It's infrastructure, if you want to call it infrastructure, that's there, it's obviously on private property. We looked at what would be required to use those. We didn't get into the point of sizing the drainage ponds because that becomes a much bigger evaluation. Ultimately, as are the existing conditions, once we have topography to get the stormwater there, it's really difficult to do that. You'd have to look at making a lot of improvements to residential backyards, whether it's bringing in fill or directly piping water from higher elevations back there. It just becomes not very practical, as well as the village having to likely undertake some of the responsibility of maintaining those ponds, which has a whole handful of, issues or concerns to deal with over time. So we looked at it, we developed a cost estimate. There could be some capacity, storage capacity in those ponds. Again, that would be a much more involved intermunicipal agreement or joint cooperation. We'd obviously be going through ponds that were developed for these private properties. And then option four, we looked at the combination of option one and two. That would be combining the two. Obviously, there's some pluses and minuses associated with each option when we look at them holistically together. There's certainly benefit, right? We feel that we can probably accomplish 90–95% of the stormwater with option two, preventing it from getting to those properties. Could an additional pipe to option two in the backyards of these properties help with the drainage? It certainly could. And from the village board standpoint, some understanding is this now just becomes additional infrastructure to maintain, additional easements to have to obtain. Access becomes difficult. Dusty gets more on his plate here associated with doubling the infrastructure, so to speak. And just a broad blanket statement, I mean, majority of your work here, with option two, would be within the highway right of way, which the village has all the legality in the world to put the infrastructure and maintain and have that access to that. Whereas once you start doing things in private property, obviously you need easements, but you got to look at the big picture of the village, and now it's the next spot and the next location where you might have to get into tough decisions in terms of where do we add infrastructure on private property and do it. So that's just a very broad blanket statement. Obviously, we wouldn't have looked at it or we wouldn't have opposed it if we didn't think it had benefit. But the way that we feel we could design a project such as this is that we could incorporate or look at option two, build that with the ability to phase in an additional infrastructure, which could be option one. So there's means to doing that. There's ways that we could design the project to allow for that to be easily expanded if needed in the future. But it would allow, the village to keep the project costs not as expensive, see what the benefits are, reassess conditions and consider the ramifications of where the outcomes were. So I can take a pause there without getting into dollars and cents, but I don't know if anyone
You should skip right to the dollars and cents.
the dollars and cents. So obviously everything comes with the cost these days, and nothing is cheap. The option one, looking at the back lot work, we had about $245,000 project. That includes installation materials and that provides construction contingency to the cost that we found go about, we had to get rid of it. There's other unknowns that we didn't know that we weren't knowing going into construction, we have funds available for that, there's also soft costs in terms of engineering, admin, legal, you name it. Again, these are prevailing wages, so we do have to go by municipal law, take prevailing wage rates, so that also will costs. Step back, these cost estimates are getting all based on going out for a public bid, so. Option 2, heading along Larchmont Drive before heading south. Cost estimate is just under $284,000. Again, then you have some additional costs associated with driveway crossings, catch basin, additional with the pipe. Option 3, although not viable, we're about $230,000. Just developed a cost estimate there. And then looking at if the village were to pursue both option 1 and option 2 all at the same time, your project cost comes up to just about $411,000. And again, your contingency, your engineering, yes, sir.
If I may, the values recording now aren't in that report that I have.
Yeah, we have so the report that's in the Dropbox is an earlier version. That was the one that we first seen, and that was before we were looking to go out to bid.
Okay.
Right, so you maybe just talk to me about that.
Yeah, so and it must have been a draft version maybe that was posted. We had a conversation with, presenting our findings of the project. Our conversation actually led to MRB then going and looking at option 4, incorporation of 2. Obviously, big pipe, 18-24-inch diameter. The bigger the projects get, obviously it becomes more of a bigger undertaking for the village to take on themselves and construct themselves. That's where we went and looked at taking this project and going out for a public bid. That allows a contractor to come in, that MRB would go ahead, or another engineer would go ahead and develop plans and specifications that contractors would go and bid on, open bid. And that's where you get into, higher costs, bonds and insurances start coming into play. And prevailing wage rates increase the cost of the project overall. So that is likely the difference.
Thank you.
Questions for Matt from the board?
How much of an impact do you think this has on the surrounding houses that aren't right in on that picture? I mean, it's a fairly wet area. Curious to know if this is beneficial more broadly or just for what we're seeing.
Well, certainly anyone upstream is conveying to this area, right? That's pretty straightforward. Are you where in general vicinity, where are you indicating?
Well, I mean, up and to the left is the rest of that community.
So some of these areas do drain to this portion of Larchmont Drive, others do carry along.
Yeah.
And that has due east toward South Street.
Do you think this would be a positive impact for everyone sort of on that side of the water?
There's definitely, yes, there's definitely a broader impact than those just being served in this area, yes.
Other board questions for Matt? None. We have time if there are questions from anyone in attendance for Matt or anyone. If you're joining us via Zoom and have questions, please use the raise hand feature. Otherwise, we'll have time for some questions. Yeah. Sure. Go ahead.
I'm lucky to be able to respond to exactly that question. I was particularly concerned to learn of my neighbor across the street who had recently purchased and had her basement flooded.
Matt, would you mind giving him the mic? Yeah. No, that's fine.
Well, we neighbors, I'm one to qualify. And I really appreciate this gathering and the presentation. That's very good. I have no huge. There was a house built right next to me, right there, the Court's house, just 15 years ago or something like that. And of course, they're in a situation where they don't know exactly what they got themselves into. It was a marsh before they built it. And they have discovered some theories in the backyard because of the entire neighborhood draining through that one culvert in front of my house. But when the engineers came around and I heard some stories about my neighbor across the street who called the fire department because her basement was flooded because of the not insufficient drainage through that culvert under that road. That did concern me.
Any other comments or questions?
I have a bit to say, but I don't know if this is the time or where I want to do it. I can usually take 5 or 10 minutes to do this, but I'm a pretty involved person here.
Sure. Can you get it down to 3 to 4?
Stop me when I'm stop.
Okay.
My next time we're at 407 North South Street extension, which is this property here. And the both proposal, option 1 and option 2, we utilize portions of my property, and we also own this piece here. My pond, I put in a drainage swale that goes down here. Pretty pleased with the way things are now. I actually don't have a lot of issues with drainage. When I caught up with these guys and they walk around, I think it may have been one of the other fellows there asked if I would consider, they were excited about that drainage swale. They like the condition and the access and what have you. And I said, sure, I'll take a look. I'm also going to preface this with, I have some wonderful neighbors and I'm really happy to help when I can. That said, my wife and I are pretty reluctant to utilize either of those 2 proposals. And for a number of reasons, which I can get into here if you want, but basically, there are lots of reasons. I'll just quick read through them. The majority of the water flow is down into these ponds here and out. And both of these proposals will be taking pretty much draining the southern half of the large Mount Panoramic development and running it through my property. So I do have, and that began to address some of those concerns. I do have some concerns about where it dumps off. I didn't design this swale to handle large amounts of water. And I know that I've seen, I'm that guy in the muck boots out there during rainstorms. And I've actually spent the last 2 days out in my muck boots with my transit, trying to get a line on this, since I knew that this really was going to affect our property and or our neighbor's property. So my concern is the sheer volume of water that would be shifted over, not following its natural course. There is a large, really where these 3 properties come together, right here is a high piece of ground. So this is 118 large mount, this is 116. 115 is on high ground, going all the way back. And some other issues with these is from here to that point, which is high ground, about a 5-foot elevation increase. So they're going to have to work. There's going to be some serious digging going on the various heights. And then it's a fairly gentle grade to get down, so it's still going to be pretty deep, and they're going to need to keep the grade to move that down to my scale. This over here, this option, basically, this is all at what we'll call pond level. It rises very little, so there's really not a lot of room to bury a pipe before it goes below my pond level. And I'm not may have some issues in. But really the biggest thing that I see here is that we do have a pipe that handles a lot of water. It goes this way, and then it eventually flows into this pond. By building either of these, we're still going to have water coming down, coming from the house properties down to this area. And the problem is that this is base level, if you will, sea level, for those of you who are coastal. And these properties were, as was described earlier, marked with ground is better. You can pump the water away, but if it's at sea level, you're gonna have cattails growing. So you can, I understand that some of the mitigation or an important part of the mitigation efforts is to get that water to flow quickly and it's in as large a volume as you can. This water doesn't flow, it just sits there. It's at the water table most of the year, and that's why you see cattails growing there. So if you want to improve that situation, you aren't going to do it. What's going to happen is one of two things. Either people are going to put fill in their backyard to raise their level, or you're going to drop the sea level. And we can do that here because we're not on the ocean. Invited neighbors that own both of these ponds. And this is just an alternative option that I've gone out. We've got basically close to 20-foot pipe here, 150 feet of pipe here, and then just an open earthen swale that runs down here, and eventually around this property into the ditch across the street. Starting here, it would be a pretty simple process of excavating that down several feet, so you reduce the level of this pond. Then you dig out this, drop it down 2 feet, and put in, potentially, if you really want to increase the flow, double the pipes on this one, double the size, and you reduce. Imagine if these two ponds were 2 to 3 feet lower than they are. So what that would do is that would reduce, it would enable water to flow deeper than the backyards where the people are. And so that the other positive of that is that during high storm, high water events, you'd have 2 to 3 feet of pond dike that could be a catchment if the water wasn't flowing fast enough. And so I think it really, this is in a private, like either private landowners, they're good people, it's worth talking to them. You alluded to the idea that politically it's difficult to work with these folks. Well, I'm also a private citizen and politically it can get difficult with me. So that's worth investigating to see if they're on board, could potentially be on board. Nobody really talks about who's paying for any of this, but I know Jared, who owns this one, would love to have this thing straightened out, and maybe he'd be willing to have some improvements done to his pond so that it makes it worth his time. But cost-wise, very expensive on this streaming. You can either use the same pipe and still keep that restricted flow a little bit, or you can double up that pipe. So that's 20 plus 20 is 40, 150, 150 is 300. So you have 390 feet of pipe instead of 770 or 880 or whatever the options wanted to come up with. So part of it is a little bit of goodwill with neighbors and trying to figure out how they can benefit as well so that they come on board with this. And I think both of these properties would benefit because I've done this with my pond, my swale, I put in myself, and I lowered my pond level a little bit, and that helped dry out the backyard a little bit, which is fairly level. So I think everybody can benefit from this. There may be an aesthetic issue to deal with, but it's nice that it's overflow. So we're really, I think, move the water out, it's already there, move the water out there. So that's an idea. Even if that doesn't come to fruition, smaller ways to tackle this. The tether and per pond drain is designed as a vertical drain with a grate over it. And so that was covered with leaves and the water down the pond. So we designed the drain so that these ponds should flow faster, even if we didn't reduce the level, it would probably go a long way towards mitigating some of the flow issues that you're really trying to work out here. I think Dusty mentioned this on his walk over and over and over again, that between 110 and 112 is this pipe that they like somewhere down here. And the owners or the previous owners put a cap on it, so it's much smaller if you can reduce it on it. So the fact that you down its natural course, right? This whole area here. I spoke with the fellow who built one of the houses in the development this morning in Gordon Gallo, and he described this is as a marquee trail before the highway was being built. And that 110, 112, and 114, I think, all require extensive amounts of fill to get to have a place to put the houses.
John, I'm gonna have to give you the 10-second one.
So the country warning is this, if you have to talk with anybody here tonight, certainly with the engineer, to express some of more of my ideas. I think my goal is to help my neighbors, so that I would like my neighbors. The other thing that I want to mention in 5 seconds is there's more than one problem. And I think the engineers are really only addressing one mistake, which is moving pipelines of water quickly. But a lot of the residents have property that's not rated very well. So you got comics and reflections. And so I would like to have seen in the report actually a description of what the actual issues are, so we could address those issues. Some of it is wet basements, some of it is perennial cacti swamp yard. Some of it is people don't want to have fast moving water running through their yard. I don't know, because it wasn't really city up in the floor. Over here, I'm not even able to see attaching quite a day, but it's right here. We can't find the entrance to the pipe even in the area. I thought the word got this morning, and he thinks it's maybe 2 house lots down, sure. But supposedly there was water coming out of that pipe, and then water running off the corner of this road, and the runs between the Hunt's property and the Thayer property here, and then it wanders over underneath and around the Hunt's pool and into our yard. And an easy way to solve that would be to run the pipe, continue the pipe under his guy and have it day like on a nice slope here in my room. That because I wouldn't be adding any more water. I wouldn't be changing the flow of the water. I would just be shifting it from going this way to this way. And I already have a pretty bad area in this area here. So
Okay, John, second 10-second warning.
okay. Anyway, I thought that chat with anybody about this because obviously I like my neighbors, I want to be happy, and I'm not excited about either of the proposals.
Thanks, John. I would encourage you to send any information that you would like to Matt,
Okay.
since he's the engineer.
One last thing, enlarging the pond makes no sense, because you're gonna have the larger pond, and it's gonna be full most of the time. And then you're not dealing with any flow. So the third thing doesn't seem to make sense, at least from my perspective, doesn't make sense. I like that there was that third idea. But I think it's also a larger pond, it's just a larger pond, which can't really remain anything to the drainage. But if you drop the one, it makes it bigger. And thank you for your time. Thanks for your work.
So before we take any additional questions or comments, which I am happy to do, I want to take a step back and explain the genesis of this report. We are still in the ideas phase, but I want to make sure everyone is clear on my intent going into this. As most of you or all of you know, the entire Larchmont Tamarack area was developed by mostly a single individual over the course of a couple of decades in an area where there was known to be water issues. And as is usually the case, you build one house and you pipe everything to the next property, and then you build that house and pipe it to the next property, and so on. So since 1986, when the first house was built, the village's position has been that these are all private properties and they are all private property owners' problems. That is both technically and legally correct. However, a couple of years ago, several of you approached me and said, hey, how about a little bit of help? So when I went to MRB and said, let's take a look and see, have MRB get a sense of what the drainage issues are. And let's see what is potentially possible from the municipality's perspective, given the following. The village may not spend taxpayer dollars on private property, period. The village cannot get grant money to spend money on private property, period. That's pretty restrictive. And so MRB's approach was to say, okay, what can be done that's in the village right of way? Or what could be done if we can acquire the necessary easements? And so this is not a commentary on whether there are other options that are viable, whether deepening the drainage ponds to the south of the Larchmont properties would or would not be a good idea. It's simply to say that the village nor the town of Ulysses can ever pay for any of that. So I'm, again, happy to field more questions and comments. I think any ideas that fit into that category that perhaps MRB has not thought of or worth thinking of, anything that would allow for the village to apply for $500,000 worth of grant money, which is not a giant dollar amount when we're talking about grants, should be something that we consider, as long as we understand that there are significant restrictions to what a local government can spend money on. And so if it comes down to, initially I was attracted to the option 2 idea, assuming at the time that John may be interested in that. If John is not interested, or even if John was interested in option 2, if we go to option 1 and one property owner says, I don't want any permanent easements in my backyard because I don't want the DPW showing up without, unannounced, then that would stop option 1. So you can see there's a lot of dominoes that have to line up, starting with the scope of the project being viable, moving along to where do we find the money? The village does not have $500,000 to allocate to private property drainage at the southern end of the village. And are folks willing to participate? This isn't eminent domain stuff. We're not building a convention center in downtown Ithaca. This is private property owners have to be willing to allow this to happen on their property. So I appreciate everything you said, John. I'm not an engineer, so it sounds perfectly reasonable what you suggested. But we are limited to what we can do from a taxpayer spend standpoint, which equally applies to grants. We did, as most of you know, get $250,000 from former Assembly Member Lifton's office to do some drainage work on Seneca Road. And one of the specific stipulations was everything had to happen in the right of way. Backyard lots were off, easements were off. It was right of way work only. So even the idea of applying for a grant where we might be doing work in easements is something that is a question mark. I think Assembly Member Kellis could be talked into it, but it's still an open question. So that's what I wanted to just add to the conversation. We do still have a few minutes if anyone else has comments or questions for us or for Matt. Sure.
Well, I don't think this is directly relevant, but I just recently joined the pollinator committee in Trumansburg, and I'm just wondering if there's been a study done of exactly what's in the stormwater, and would that impact, if live with Jim at 112, we don't really have a problem. And I'm trying to rewild that area. I like the cattails. I like all the, wetland behind me. So I'm just wondering, I don't want a lot more pollution, polluted water coming back there. But I'm wondering if that's been taken into consideration.
There, to my knowledge, has never been a study on stormwater content, at least in the village. I know there's a lot of studies that's done as to what's being discharged in the lake and the various creeks.
Would be a grant.
Could be, yeah. Could be, sure. Yes. Steve.
Thank you and the village MRB for looking at this for us. It's greatly appreciated. Appreciate your comments. Is there any sort of an avenue that we can get updates to where things are at in terms of meetings and the process?
Sure. I mean,
A chance that most of us found out about this.
Yeah. So tonight's presentation was primarily so that MRB, because I think Ben and I are the only ones that have seen this report. So this was primarily so that MRB could present to the board, here's what can be done in their view, and here's what the cost looks like. Dan, can you hear us? Hey, Jen, can you hear us?
Oh, she's not
There, actually.
Now try.
Jen, can you hear us? Okay. All right. How long ago did you lose us? Do you know?
Couple of minutes ago.
Okay. We should trust that we're still live streaming.
Yeah. They switched back again, and that was what we like for a year.
Okay. Technical difficulties are fun. Any other comments or questions about?
Just a quick question. So there's no going to be no environmental study, you had said, right? Is that what's in the report or?
The environmental study would come once we get to having a project.
Okay,
We're a long way away from even having a proposed project. This is more still at the research phase in my mind.
And you spoke about not using public money for this project. The public money is used for this presentation, the study that MRB has done,
Right.
and that is allowed through.
You can't spend public money on private property.
Okay,
So I can't come, we can't come and dig a pond for you. But we could put in a culvert in front of your house in the right of way. That's the big differentiation. Now, the potential carve out to that is through some type of permanent easement, which basically means that strip of property doesn't become village property, but it becomes permanently accessible to the village. And that conveys with a deed in perpetuity. So that would be the one carve out to some of that. So it's something we have to continue to investigate. Now that we have an idea, for the first time ever, we have an idea of what our engineers feel could be done, which was really my goal. It's one thing to say, again, it's legally and technically correct. But it's one thing to say, it's private property, this is your problem. It's another thing to say, well, if we could help, we would like to. We need to know what the could help is. And now we have an idea. And we just have to figure out if it's workable and viable. And if not today, maybe down the road, or maybe with some additions and subtractions somewhere.
I can shoot a couple of answers to your question about possibility of increased pollution. If you're looking at the volume of water that come through those two ponds would increase the volume, and therefore what you're taking is a lot of water off roads. So you're looking at taking water out of the ditches, the drainage ditches. You're looking at the possibility of increased salt from road salt. You're looking at the possibility of increased petroleum deposits from cars, oil, and so forth. Those two ponds, I own the property of the lower pond, and I own the property at one point of the upper pond. Before it was a pond, and that whole area was pretty wet, but it did not drain particularly well, and it still doesn't. So a lot of the water would come in and just stay there. And he's speaking for that little pond that I'm very fond of. I didn't put it in for a catch surface as a stormwater trap. I put it in because I wanted the fish that were in it and my grandchildren to swim in that pond. And raising questions of road runoff pollution makes me pretty nervous. The other part of that is when you drain those ponds out, that water's gonna have to go somewhere. And it's going to go, as you're looking at the map, south and east. And another set of neighbors have a, you call it a swale, but it's actually a ditch. It goes around their house, because even now the water comes out of my pond and flows into their So those have to be addressed in terms of additional neighbors. And the little part that is south and east of Little Pond is a pretty flat area. And right now, there's hardly any drainage out of it. It just goes out and it spreads out. To get an increased volume of water, regardless of whether you build a pond bigger or you build one. The increased volume of water is going to have to go through a wooded area and into and around their house to finally get to the drainage place in Phil Street. That blocks the upper part of my field, and I like to keep the weeds mowed, so you have to build me a bridge. And I won't go further into that, but if you go to option 3 or option 5, we'd have to talk.
Any other questions or comments on the drainage study?
Thank you for engaging in this conversation with the public. I don't have these meetings very often, and it's refreshing because I do attend board meetings, and that does not happen at school board meetings. So I do appreciate everyone here being respectful and taking the time to listen to your constituents. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
item number 4 on the agenda is our first public comment period. If anyone has anything non-Larchmont drainage that they would like to ask or comment on
Okay.
while you're here,
This is non-Larchmont drainage.
okay?
Many of my neighbors have expressed concern about the new development. We call it, up on Green.
Pick a name, 46 South Street.
So it might be related, but some of my neighbors have expressed concern about. It kind of feels like the elephant in the room, you know what I mean? Because there would, maybe that's completely self-contained. I really don't really know, but a number of my neighbors have expressed concern and objections under the unfounded assumption, because I trust the engineers, but their feeling is that it's gonna cause a drainage problem in the south of the village. I do not profess to have an opinion on it, but it does feel like an elephant in the room, which was not addressed.
I'm not going to speak on behalf of the planning board, but I believe that the engineering that was done, that the planning board reviewed, they did spend quite a bit of time discussing that.
I know that.
And I believe my understanding of their engineering is that they believe it will be self-contained.
And
And I'm not an engineer to comment on it. I do actually. So topographically, that section of property is interesting because a lot of it drains towards the corner of South and Camp.
Oh.
So if you have, if you talk to the owner of the property at South and Camp, you will find out that there's a lot of runoff that they get from there. And so that'll be interesting.
Yeah. That's all.
Any other non-Larchmont questions or comments?
We noticed they started working on what looks like a road going through to cut down a number of trees today as we drove by. And both the South Street side of that and the Pennsylvania Street side of that.
Right. Yeah, they're
Operating in something or other.
Yeah, they are slated to begin work now this spring.
Yeah, they started this one.
Other questions? Comments? We're a government, so I can't ask for contributions. All right, then hearing no other public comment, we'll move on to old business, which starts with a conversation about our draft zoning revision.
Yeah, so. When we last left this part, we were declaring our intent to be lead agency for the environmental review for the zoning. We have since then sent out that declaration to all interested and impacted agencies. given the requisite amount of time for them to respond. And I've heard back from some, but not all, is very common. And we're in a position at this point to declare this board as being the agency for the environmental review of our zoning. So the way we go about doing that is by talking about the resolution. I am hesitant to read all of what we'll do as anyhow.
Do you want me to read it?
Sure, that would be wonderful.
So we have a resolution, which is our declaration of seeker lead agency. Whereas under the supervision of the mayor, the Board of Trustees appointed a comprehensive plan and zoning revision committee to guide the process. And whereas the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees has reviewed the recommendation of the CPZR committee and the draft of the amended zoning local law and has approved moving forward with the steps needed to finalize such draft, undertake an environmental review thereof, and adopt such local law. And whereas with the assistance of planning consultant EDR, the CPZR has developed revisions to the Village of Trumansburg zoning local law and environmental documentation in support of the same. And whereas the zoning revisions align with the 2021 comprehensive plan, which reflects conditions that have changed since the previous plan was adopted in 2008. And whereas the zoning revisions include the clarification of confusing or contradictory language in the zoning regulations, as well as updates to encourage affordable housing with the goals to facilitate a more inclusive community, attract young families, and meet the demand for senior housing. And whereas these changes are needed to provide residents and local decision makers with the predictability they need to make informed decisions about the village's land use and future development. And whereas the secret proposed action is legislative in nature involving the adoption of the zoning revisions by the Board of Trustees. And whereas pursuant to the State Environmental Quality Review Act, SECRA, the CPZR submitted to the Village Board Part 1 of a full environmental assessment form dated February 13, 2023. And whereas the Village Board determined that the proposed action was classified as a type 1 action under SECRA and its implementing regulations pursuant to 6 NYCRR 617.4. And whereas in accordance with the provisions of 6 NYCRR Part 617, the Board of Trustees of the Village of Trumansburg intends to serve as lead agency for the SECRA review of this type 1 action. And in this capacity will determine if the proposed action will have a small, moderate, or significant effect on the environment. And whereas the Village Board, having commenced a coordinated SECRA review that complies with the requirements for type 1 actions under the revised SECRA regulations. And whereas Part 1 of the FEAF, having been reviewed by the Village Board, was deemed adequate relative to the proposed action on February 13, 2023. And whereas the Village Board passed a resolution to seek lead agency status with respect to the proposed action in accordance with the SECRA regulations at 6 NYCRR section 617.6 on February 13, 2023. And whereas the village clerk has served by mail a notice of intent to establish lead agency to all the required 13 involved or interested agencies. And whereas 2 of these 13 agencies, namely the town of Hector and Tompkins County Department of Planning and Sustainability, have returned a document advising that each agency has no objection to the Village Board assuming lead agency status for the proposed action. And whereas New York State Department of Transportation, CNY Regional Planning and Development, New York State Parks Department, New York State Department of Agriculture and Markets, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Seneca County, Town of Enfield, Town of Ithaca, Town of Ulysses, Town of Covert, and the Trumansburg Planning Board have not responded within the required 30-day period. Now therefore be it resolved by members of the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees as follows. 1, the Village Board hereby establishes itself as lead agency to coordinate the environmental review of the proposed actions as described above. And 2, this resolution shall take effect immediately.
Thank you.
Would you like to move that?
I would like to move that with one change. 3 whereas from the bottom, and I can make this change in the Word doc version of the box. It said that the CPZR prepared the Part 1, and that is not accurate. We prepared the Part 1. So I want to change that to say the Village Board prepared Part 1 local EAF. Yes, I would like to make that motion.
I'll second.
Move that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any board discussion? Questions?
Will a chatbot be able to make these in the future? That'd be for us.
That's my big line.
The chatbot will be the voice of the word of our.
Ben's working on it.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so that means we need public hearings.
Yes, so next step is to schedule a hearing for both the joint hearing for both the seeker review proposals for the law. And I would propose we schedule that for our second meeting in April. That would give us enough time to have all these things kind of put right in their place, if that is sufficient. If we've got time before that meeting, we can also push things later, I believe, but that's what we're kind of going to get in with the plan we had in mind.
So our second meeting, our second regular meeting is Monday, the 24th. Anybody know they're not going to be here Monday, April 24th?
I'll be here.
Be here.
Okay,
All right.
so Jess, we're gonna do public hearings for zoning seeker. And you want to do them both?
Yeah, that is. My plan is to have a joint.
Okay,
That's what we've done in the past. That's how we did for the comp plan.
Yeah.
we'll do our public hearing on seeker for the draft zoning document and then the public hearing for the zoning document itself.
Great.
7 p.m. Monday, April 24th.
Great.
And then you want to talk about,
Yeah, so one last comment to make. I had sent an email over the weekend. So I had a conversation with the county planning department. We're required to have our zoning reviewed by them as part of just the process for these things. I'm trying to remember. And so they were very supportive of the changes, very impressed with kind of the quality of the revision and the best practices that have been included in the draft. They did give some interesting feedback around the affordable housing incentive section. There's kind of two aspects that they gave feedback around. One is that most development projects that are funded via kind of federal and state dollars for affordable housing tend to have to be around 50+ units. That is a lot of units. It's more than I think we really like. But they did point out that is kind of in tension with our 20 unit per lot cap. And so, this was kind of an informal conversation about the changes. They can give formal feedback about the changes that would require us to either make changes or need a supermajority to adopt the zoning. I don't know if they'll do that with these comments or not. This is kind of like a friendly conversation to start, so we'd have to see where that would go. They also gave some feedback that there is some cost and price limits, like ceilings in there of how expensive a unit can be before it's no longer considered affordable. And those are not quite standard, and we run the risk of kind of disqualifying some funding vehicles that might interact with those in weird, interesting ways. So those were kind of the two pieces of feedback I gave back. I gave it some more thought, and I would like to recommend that we make the kind of smaller to medium-sized change to the affordable piece in the zoning. The smaller change is to remove those additional price caps. I don't think it adds a lot. The general intent for this section is to help projects that might be come in and have subsidized funding from some sort of federal or state entity. Those are going to come with their whole own list of requirements.
So were they saying that those numbers were too high to be considered affordable?
that they might just interact in weird ways. So it could be that some, you know, in some place, maybe the funding allows them to go a little higher than that. And you, not that it's a problem per se, but it's just the more pieces you layer on, the more possibility you have for kind of weird interactions. And I think the committee in conversation around like what is the aims for this section was looking to create kind of a lower bar, specifically with the intent that anything that gets funding is going to have its own sort of requirements, and that we would let those kind of be the guiding requirements. There's still a requirement that for it to be affordable, it has to be targeting families making less, 80% or less of the median income in the area. So that is still absolutely in there. This is just more, there was an additional set of price restrictions in there that I don't think was doing much more on top of that 80% piece. And so I was suggesting we just remove that and kind of remove some complications, simplifies the law a bit, and allows really whatever funding vehicle comes through is going to be the one that has the most impact on what gets built. The other change is a slightly larger change in the affordable section. What the kind of benefit to building affordable housing is that you can build more lots on a slightly smaller parcel. You reduce the parcel size requirement. That's kind of the benefit you get for building affordable housing. And I would suggest that we switch that to allowing you to build more houses on the same size lot instead of the same amount of houses on a smaller lot. It's for small enough developments, it's literally the same thing. You're switching it one way or the other. The difference is on the larger end. If you build a 20-unit property, you can maybe have 30 units on it. The way I'm thinking of this is that it again, on the small and medium projects, it's exactly the same. On the slightly larger end, you can put a little more units on the lot. That gets you closer to this 50-unit kind of number. Maybe it allows you to build 2 units next to each other. That gets you to that 50 units. Gives a little more flexibility to try and encourage some of that development. It's not all the way there. It's not saying you can put 50 units on a lot, because I don't think we've heard that, you know, that's not something that people interested isn't really in keeping with much of what we see in the village. But it might be kind of a middle ground to say we're trying to stretch a little more than we otherwise would for affordable housing to allow and understand the reality that, like, for there to be reasonable subsidies, you have to have bigger developments, which is not something we want. When we want the affordable housing, it's like, how do we wrestle with it? So that was my proposal of like kind of a little bit of a middle ground.
And I offhandedly just mentioned this in conversation, so for me to like envision my wonderful retirement community of people that want to downsize, so that would allow for that, right?
If it was focused on.
If it was focused on building a senior community of, say, like we were talking about, how they have in Horseheads, these beautiful little bungalows with these little streets and stuff. So that would make it allowable to build perhaps a community like that, that would allow that many structures in a certain area.
Yeah, so you would still need to have a fairly large parcel, to be honest.
Right.
But this could allow, if you're affordable and they're marketed towards affordable, and there's a whole, you know, what does that mean? That it's very specific what that means and so forth. You could maybe, instead of having 20, which is the limit of units you have on a lot right now, you could have 25 or 30, depending on, you couldn't have more than 30. The proposal I was giving was you can have an extra unit for each 2 affordable units you build. So if you built the 20 full units, you could have 10 more additional units, as long as they're all affordable, basically.
But to emphasize though, to get to that threshold, you would have to have 2.
You would still need to.
Neighboring parcels in order to make that work.
Yeah.
We're still, I mean,
Or
we're still,
one large one you could subdivide or something like that. But yes, we're not going all the way to saying this is 50 units on.
Right.
So it
You
is.
could have a huge swath of land
Right.
and do something like that, development wise.
If you got a huge swath, you have to subdivide it.
Right,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So it's this, there's so many tensions, but I felt that it was in keeping with the spirit of the law, giving you some sort of density bonus in one way or another. It's just flipping it around a little bit to try and get closer to that 50 unit option that allows more affordable housing dollars to actually come in. It's trying to find a middle ground.
I'm new to the affordable housing world, but I can tell you that number is going high. It's 50 is a stretch now. I mean, the subsidies are not keeping up with the market, so we're gonna be chasing this tail for everything, no matter what we do.
You're saying that it's getting to be, you need to know even more than that?
Yeah, I mean, the economics, like the subsidies are not keeping up with the market. By any
Yeah.
stretch. So
Right,
I
you mean
think
what it costs to build?
if this is a sincere, you know, a sincere feeling by this board in this community that this is something that we want to continuously, we're gonna have to reevaluate this,
Yeah.
probably regularly.
That's fair.
Maybe not week to week, like the last couple of weeks, but it will be something that'll come up
Yeah.
again. I don't think that 50 is a threshold, and that's obviously a general, that's a
Right.
rule of thumb situation, but it's still.
It's
Nonetheless,
very difficult. It is that type of development very much. It's a struggle to figure out how to conceptualize that inside of a smaller village, and I don't know the answer for that. And you know, I think we can and should put this in our zoning and try and incentivize it to the extent that we can. And I think there is a unfortunate conflict of market economics and subsidies and village sizing. That means it is very difficult to build this stuff. And I think that drives me even stronger towards some of the other changes we're making around smaller lot sizes, smaller home sizes, and allowing people to hopefully build market rate things that are anywhere near some affordable for somebody, but it's a real struggle right now.
It is hard, yeah.
I know most people's eyes glaze over anytime anyone mentions anything related to math, but I learned over late last week that 2022 was the first year in history where the median income in Tompkins County could not afford a median home price based on how banks would lend. So that actually makes perfect sense because construction costs are what they are. It doesn't matter who's building it, it still costs the same dollar. So it's not subsidized and that's not keeping up. And 80% of MHI isn't going to be anywhere close to being able to cover any of that.
no, and I mean, I think I don't, like I said, I'm new to the industry, but my sense is that the state and feds are trying to keep up. It's just, you know, the wheels of change are slow and bureaucracy. It's just the nature of the game.
So if there's any concerns with those, feel free to, you know, say more here or bring them up to me. Otherwise, I'll start looking at incorporating those changes back into the draft and we can move forward with that.
Before we publish the public hearing notice.
Great, yeah, I can do that. But they're actually, you know, they're conceptually a little bit of a shift, but wording wise. I can adopt those changes and send you a new updated version.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on zoning?
Nothing from me.
So as you know, we requested a quote from the same company that the town of Ulysses chose to do their IT risk assessment. Town of Ulysses had sent out an RFP, not only for the IT risk assessment, but for services. They then pared it down to just the risk assessment. I'm hoping everyone has had a chance to review what was sent to us. I will not read this entire document, but it basically, Advanced 2000 is the name of the company. They're out of Buffalo. They do a lot of work with municipalities. They will be looking at 3 fundamental questions. What are the business risks, both internal and external, related to IT, cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and what mitigation actions may be required? Is IT capable of meeting short-term and long-term business demands, and does it compare to industry best practices? And is the IT budget spent wisely and in line with industry standards? They will come down on site, which means multiple sites, this building, fire hall, DPW, the water plant they'll need to get to, the sewer plant they'll need to get into. I think that's it. The ambulances they'll need to get into. And they'll look for various areas to analyze. And then the bottom line is they will charge us $2,500 to do it. And from there, they will develop a report and tell us what we're not doing. And what we need to do to bring ourselves somewhere into the late 20th century and early 21st century. And whether or not we choose to use them as the IT services company is a separate conversation. So I would move that this board, actually, I shouldn't move the board to authorize me to sign something. I would entertain a motion to authorize my signing the contract for IT risk assessment. Any questions, conversation?
I'm terrified.
Yeah.
That's my only,
As well you should be.
yeah.
No, it's awesome.
I think, I said this to Rona, I'm curious to see what level of depth they actually go to. Sometimes it's hard to really tell from these kind of high level proposals, but the fee seems very reasonable, especially for traveling all the way down here and so forth. So I'm very interested to see what they come up with, and it is beyond past due for us to start looking at this. So it's very reasonable for that.
And my understanding is this is somewhere in the neighborhood of 25% of their private sector fee. So they definitely do a different thing for municipalities. So any other questions, comments?
Could it be possible that we're so archaic regarding against
Happy to still have it.
and nobody can get in because
That's right. We
Okay,
could
let me-
read our file cabinets to get that information.
Stale.
that's.
Coffee rings and everything.
Well, if there are no more questions or comments, all in favor of authorizing me to sign this contract for services with Advanced 2000, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay.
Where are they from?
Fund balance probably, but ask me that tomorrow.
Okay.
We'll put it in the IT line
Okay.
and then
Yeah.
budget mod it out of,
Okay, I didn't know if it was gonna come out of the board or.
no, take it out of the IT line and then budget mod it from fund balance.
Great.
Remind Jessica to budget mod it from fund balance.
I will.
Make that one of those sticky notes. New business. Speaking of spending money, we have a quote.
Could we potentially proceed to our ranking?
This is the green team who's been waiting. Then yes, let us switch around. Apologies for
Unless you
being,
want to hear about the Toshiba comment.
it's fun stuff.
Speaking of archaic technology.
Yes, green team, please.
So everyone remembers the green team is the project team from the UC Events and Tourism Committee looking at investigating a comprehensive idea of our green spaces, according to the comprehensive plan and mapping it out, and they got somewhere.
So, yeah, we've been looking at the public spaces throughout Trumansburg, looking at which ones are green spaces downtown, farmers market, by the farmers market, and then the space down at the water tower. And, as we were looking at these places, what happened is a grant came up. It's from the Tompkins County Department of Planning and Sustainability. It's a $5,000 grant. And what we're doing right now is looking for what could be low hanging fruit that we could potentially, put forward to get those $5,000. So after some discussion, we looked at Water Tower Park, one right on the corner as you come in Hector Street there. Currently there's issues with drainage in the park. It's the gateway to the village, so it's something that we we really see as a great place to improve. There's currently kind of a makeshift arboretum there. There's some signs around the trees. There's a picnic table, bench, just really simple. But you know, after looking at it a little bit further, yes, land.
It should be something.
Check tonight. Thank you.
Can I pass out the second row? Can I pass out
Basically, what we did is we looked at the park and we kind of wanted to think about what it could potentially be. And this is just one possible vision for the park, obviously. You know, we want to gather public input, talk to more people to figure out what they would want, but this phase, for the $5,000, we'd like to kind of set the infrastructure, being essentially the parking lot and, you know, some of the planting mounds around the outside to really define the edge of the park and really make it a gateway. So as you're coming into Trumansburg, you kind of see it as a gateway. So, you know, the ideas of the trail, you know, the more picnic tables, the pavilion, that's, you know, still up in the air somewhat. But just kind of, you know, setting the stage for this as more of a park area. Basically plantings and parking right now. So, so right now we're basically just looking for approval to move forward with $5,000 grant application for it. And, I'm not thinking I missed.
No, it's beautiful. I love this idea. Love it.
How- How far are you thinking $5,000 is gonna go?
So that is the question. And, you know, we probably start with the plantings to do some of the pollinator mounds on the edge to, fix some of the stormwater issues, some of the grading around the outside. But we think, you know, essentially the first of some structure run and basically just develop a little bit more in the parking lot area. I don't know if we can get the full parking lot area and the pollinator mounds, but what we do is probably seek to do some sort of community planting for those mounds in this area. So try to do it as more of a community effort that way.
With the newfound pollinator.
Yeah, we were excited that it piggybacked the community, and then recognizing, which I think James just said, that if anything was gonna happen there, we have to sort of protect it from the street, and so having those berms does that as like a fencing kind of area.
Can I ask a couple questions about the grant process? So most of the grants in Tompkins County are matching funds. Is that the way that this one is?
I do not believe so. I don't believe it, it's a little bit secret that we looked further down and it didn't.
Because generally they are, and I was just gonna say, it's easy to match funds because there is a price that they set for volunteer hours.
Oh, right.
We also, in with that money is, if you have to, is, like, we have a cost for our DPW employees, we have a cost for equipment. It also includes costs for the administrative, it's always the process to administer the grant. So there's, if it is, or they ever say, even if it's 25%, I'm saying, that's one of the biggest things, so I know Tompkins County grants that always have this matching thing, but it's not hard.
Right.
I just want to let you guys know it's not hard to do, to get up to $5,000.
I appreciate that.
Okay.
I did not see that in my initial read.
I think it's not, but we'll triple check again, that's a good point to remember in general, especially as the team moves forward.
Especially, I'm the same, Tompkins County, my experience
Yeah.
with the grants that I've done with them,
you know, they're getting to that point that they're great to give you money, but they want matching funds and there is no volunteer hours, like, you know, just keep track of all this stuff.
The other thing is that it's up to a $5,000 grant per municipality. So if you were all thinking that you were going to apply for something else by April 17th, then that would take away that, you know, portion of that money, but it was my understanding that nothing has come to the top to, you know, compete with this, so we would be asking for the full 5,000 for this particular.
I think that's good, just have to, just for you. I mean, I always signed up on grants. So
Yeah.
I'm just saying that it would be difficult for her. There's a good, yeah.
Yeah.
So we really wanted to see if we wanted board buy-in to see if, because it's using the village's name, to move forward.
They are keeping it close.
Great.
I love the idea. I live on Elm Street, so I would love to roll down there and play at my pollinator. I'd love it.
And the visualizations are especially needed with this particular, end of March, beginning of April. So
Yeah. No, I think it's great, and I always wanted something more there.
We really like it, it was initially James's idea, but we really, for the same reason that, Jess said, that it's really, open to the elements there. And both visually, physically, all of it, and I know if I had small children right now, that would not be a place that I would want them to be, because there's no visual boundaries of like, you know, the road is the
Yeah.
boundary. And that's-
Actually, I do push baby strollers in that little area around the trees through the grass.
Yeah.
So, I would love it if there was a little trail there.
Yeah.
I know we're used to seeing like cocktail napkin presentations for this kind of stuff, but isn't it great to have to do landscape?
It's wonderful. Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it opens up a whole lot of possibilities too for community gatherings and maybe doing an art park thing at one time to have people display things. It would be awesome.
Yeah, even the one thing we were thinking is the pollinator, and just that idea, you could environmental education based on, you know, the arboretum started there with those tree labels. I mean, you could have an environmental education based on different pollinators in the gardens.
Mhm.
Yep, the signage, sculpture, and so, I mean, it could go in many ways, and that's why I think that public input would be important, so. But yeah, I'm excited.
So I have a couple of thoughts. One, this is fantastic, and I think it's a great idea. Two, we have a tree committee that works. These trees have a sort of interesting story as far as the village program, and maybe you've heard that already, or not, like.
No, just that they're labeled, we know there's a story.
So years ago, the village used to pay for a portion of street tree plantings. And these were the demonstration trees. So you would go and pick out the species that you liked, and then the village would pay for part of it. That was the origin of those. But now we know that some of those are Bradford pears. They're pollinating and ruining our ecosystem. So we're gonna actually take those out. So I don't know, I can't picture this very well, but are these trees actually the locations of the current
So
trees?
they're based on the aerial, they're basically the location.
But they are right.
They are correct, based on. We're actually missing one though, there's, I think it might be a sycamore around the road or something. We're actually proposing some pollinator trees as well, which would be new like cercis or more native species.
But that would be a fun education piece, I think. This is the tree that we want to kill. And this is the tree. that we want to plant. Because those Bradford pears are ecologically nuclear. I mean, they are the worst.
Just make sure you're the one that delivers that presentation.
I will deliver that.
It's not me, because it costs completely different if I do it.
I will deliver that message with the chainsaw. But the other piece I wanted to bring up is that we do, so we have the pollinator group, tree committee, and then you guys, so there's a bit of a like, I don't know, a potential for either like, hey, let's all get together and mind meld on this, and then nothing happens, or everyone sort of moves together. So I think go for the grant would be my thing. I would say we should talk with the tree committee at some point about species and things like removing the Bradford pears, but I think the grant's great.
Okay,
I think that's marvelous.
yeah, you know that.
And I just learned the other day that the town's tree committee has part of their established mission increasing the beauty of our western gateway
Awesome.
for reasons that I cannot decipher, but that exists. So there's actually
You mean the
a
western,
million.
you mean the western gateway that the village doesn't own any property on?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And it isn't part of, I mean, it's the village specifically.
Right.
It's a very confusing mandate for the town tree committee to have. But in any case, the point is, even if we look at that just as a volunteer source, all of those committees, you have every volunteer you would ever need. So
Cool.
it's a good starting place.
Great. Like it.
Yeah.
Thank you for your efforts. Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, then I continue to do that.
Best meeting I never.
And then we have a meeting, another meeting opportunity.
And Vicky did bring up, and Vicky did bring up a good point, that the Gannett Garden Club maintains this sign thing with the flowers and everything, so maybe we can
Oh.
incorporate that.
Good.
I wanted to get.
Yeah, yeah, so great. Or no, that's all our favorite time was.
Cool, put in pollinator gardens there as well, and, some of the Eagle Scout projects, but some of the girls. Are going to too. Yes, I can't get rid of both sides. That's right.
Army. So I was gonna tag along with this, with the tree board question. We have our annual Arbor Day celebration coming up. The town committee ordered a couple, service berries and went here, they're I don't know, they're very nice. They're also pollinator trees, which feels like a thing in Trumansburg this spring. But we are going to do a joint planting with the town and village tree committees to celebrate and commemorate Arbor Day. And our question was, do we put them in the water tower property? Or do we put them across from the farmer's market? Sort of to the west of the giant, there was a big crab apple that is now gone. There's sort of an empty hillside there.
Yeah, there.
And that's actually my thinking now, because I don't want to preempt this. That feels very strange. So it feels like that's kind of established. But I wanted to bring it up before we plan, get thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think since they presented this, that it would.
Yeah,
make
it feels
more
like
sense
that
to
would
do
be.
that on the other side.
It's also kind of a void, so I would like to feel.
First were exploring that before the giant went, and then the trees died, and it was like,
There's a-
it feels real.
Yeah.
Yet it could use some new life.
Yeah,
In the farmer's market, it's right there, like that notion of joint community and larger communities already established, I think, a joint planning there.
so there is a bigger scheme afoot to build an edible forest, which I've talked to this board about before, but basically the idea is to try and build a miniature ecosystem, right? So from the understory to the overstory, everything in between produces nuts or berries or something that humans can consume, and the idea is to make sort of an accessible food resource for any number of reasons. So this could be eventually built out into something like that. And again, I think this is a good spot for that.
Could that happen where the giant is?
It could.
Because there's
So
all
it's-
the different
It's all,
space behind it too.
so what we would be planting would be small trees, so they could always be moved. Right, so we're talking about bare root 2-foot trees.
Okay.
These would, for the next couple of years, will be sort of, why is there that weird piece of fence there? Will be the primary feeling you have when you look at them. But the idea would be to build something like that out at some point, which is an idea that I very much like. But I think it's fairly clear that that's the spot to do it. I'm really just wanting to raise this so that we're all kind of aware that it's happening. And if anyone wants to come plant trees, it'll be great.
Let us know when.
Good.
The notion of an edible forest, and I'll stop talking, of an edible forest across the street from the farmer's market is really cool.
So I want to build it at the farmer's market. That's my hope.
Oh, market.
I wanna
there's
replace
no
this.
space.
If you kill all of the sumacs,
Oh, okay,
the like weed, the
Yeah.
weed hillside,
Yeah.
you terrace that,
okay,
it's a little involved. It's a dream,
okay.
you know? someday. But okay, that's great. I will take that and run with it. The other question is, the town has fronted the cost, which is like $365. We have enough money in our tree risk mitigation fund to cover, whatever half of that cost is. Checking in to see if that's all right to cover half of that cost. And I don't know the exact number, and I don't actually need board approval for it really, but more of a conceptual question just to make sure we're okay. I think, I always like the idea of joint town village enterprises. This feels like a good, easy, feel good opportunity to do it. So, but if there's objections, obviously. Very good.
Okay. Give me 1 second while I make a note of something for our April meeting if the phone wants to work.
Can you note that we need to put the Arbor Day proclamation on there too? I can remind you again, but I keep forgetting.
Okay.
When will that planning be? It'll be on Arbor
It will be, I believe, the Saturday following Arbor Day.
Day? Okay.
So Arbor Day is a Friday. And we don't want to do it on a weekend, we just.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then
so,
Jen will want to make sure that gets
Okay.
used there.
yeah,
And what's the date? Yeah,
it's the 29th of April.
okay,
So it'll be it's the weekend following the Earth Care Day that Kate was talking about at our last meeting.
Okay,
It's the weekend following that.
okay, great.
Bradford Pear, great for firewood, so
They're good.
that's what it says, so
You have one, by the way,
I do.
every day I pass it and I curse.
Where is it?
In the right of way, it's the one on the front, it's the beautiful, beautiful white flowers every spring.
Oh, yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so since I've brought,
It's a new tree.
so since I've brought this up, what happens with Bradford pears is that they cross pollinate with all of the natural apple trees and pear trees that happen in our landscape. And when they cross pollinate, the trees that grow from those seeds do not produce fruit. So they kill ecosystems because they're no longer, the next generations in 100 years, there won't be any fruit producing apple varieties naturally occurring. It's a fairly big deal. And the problem is they're very widely planted because they're
Beautiful.
That's my rant.
Yes.
Hey, from beautiful killers to Toshiba copier quote. So the
Is Jen
main. I'm sorry,
is Jen still with us?
I don't know. She's still with us.
Okay.
She's
oh,
right
there he
there.
is.
So the main copier in the main office is on its last legs. And in the Dropbox, we have a proposal for a lease this time around. Instead of paying $15,000 for a copier, we can pay $168.72 a month for 5 years and 3 months. That includes everything except the paper. Up to a certain number of copies per month. And Jessica and Jen are deeply excited about the possibility of us approving this. And so if we can always have conversations and questions, but I would entertain a motion to authorize my signing this lease contract with Toshiba for a 63-month lease for a new copier.
Yeah, I'll make that motion.
Yes,
A motion and a second. And now questions, comments.
okay, great.
Where's the old one go?
It's a good question.
Where do we take stuff to shoot it?
They take it. Go to whatever. We have given it to the fire department and, but they have their own now.
Yeah.
Whether DPW wants it. Well, I'm just saying that generally we give it.
Since you're gone, 2 more trays of paper have died. It's
No, I understand.
We're not giving it any village department.
Yeah.
Okay,
So
they
reuse
may
center.
take it, I assume.
Okay, well, if it's not saying, that's not good.
All right, okay, where it goes.
A question, because it's money. This is an additional like 10 grand. Are you just going to take that out of the contractual line, or did you want to add money to the office contractual line?
which is an initial 10 grand.
This $168 a month for 63 months is a little over $10,000.
You're gonna create a line in the budget for $168.72 times 12.
Okay. And then you're gonna offset it with, or do you just want me to offset with fund balance?
You're gonna do that tomorrow?
I can. I just printed out all the spreadsheet. Again,
Do it tomorrow and let me know when it's ready before you import it into Williamson.
okay. Okay,
And for those playing along at home, we already do have a monthly cost for Toshiba, so it's not like it's a whole new cost. It is more, but we're already spending like $100.
right, but we're gonna get that. If you go over the copies that, whatever the copy numbers that they're talking about,
Yeah,
that'll be in addition to this 160.
yeah, our service agreement that has the guy that comes in and fixes it, right, fixes it 3 times in a week.
And did you want
that?
And did you determine that that was a sufficient amount of copies for what they're providing?
Yeah, Jennifer did deep analysis
Yeah.
of this.
I'm sure we'll go over some.
Yeah, yeah.
But
someone-
it's within range, Jen, we're comfortable that it's within range of what we're currently using.
I'll do it first then.
Any other questions? It's $2,000 a year, 5 years. It's still cheaper than buying it for 15.
Is that how much anyone knows? It's
This one's
That's what it was.
This one was 8. I think so.
Anyway. Oh, heads up, it's like 30 to 60 days for.
Any other questions? Board question, board comments? Hearing none, and all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I have summer newsletter on here only to say we need to organize a summer newsletter. I believe that Mrs. Schlossberg has been voluntold that she is now your point of contact for newsletter.
Well,
She's quite eager, so
Yeah. All right,
we can use the last year's template and
I want to say that I have a reminder for like next weekend to start thinking about that. So
try to get that published and out first week of June.
Yep.
To coincide with tax bills.
Right, so I think, yeah, beginning of April, start thinking about it. So, or actually, I guess this weekend, so yes, that's on my list.
Since Jen is now in charge of the weekly newsletter, it should be a relatively
Great.
seamless transition. You talked about trees. Any other items of new business? I have one item of new business.
Oh,
The young lady to Marcia's left is enjoying her last village board meeting.
Yay.
Keyword being enjoying. We all look forward to the day. So I would like to introduce the following resolution. Whereas Ms. Victoria Badalamenti has served as the treasurer of the village of Trumansburg since July of 2012. And whereas during that time, Ms. Badalamenti, as chief financial officer for the village, has served under 2 mayors and worked in collaboration with the village board, department heads, and supervisors to curate and oversee the financial health of the village. And whereas Ms. Badalamenti's dedication, diligence, and acumen ensured the functionality of the village. And whereas Ms. Badalamenti has assisted in the betterment of the village by receiving and executing grants and capital projects. And whereas Ms. Badalamenti, in keeping with her oath of office, has faithfully discharged her duties by showing exceptional dedication to the village and her colleagues, and has consistently exceeded her work responsibilities. Now therefore be it resolved that the Village of Trumansburg Board of Trustees hereby recognizes Ms. Badalamenti for her efforts on behalf of the village. And be it resolved further that the individual members of the Board of Trustees each wishes to offer their sincere appreciation to Ms. Badalamenti for over a decade of service to the village. And I would so move.
second.
All in favor?
Aye. You're here.
Yeah.
even framed it for you.
Ooh, thank you so much. It's a little overwhelming. So it's disheartening to leave. It's hard. Yeah. But I enjoyed it. And I was like, but it's been a pleasure.
If you really miss us, you know there are always open seats.
Do I get more than 3 minutes? That was a long 10 seconds.
Yes, indeed.
We actually never put a limit, right? On
We have done away with the 3-minute limit.
And it has worked, by the way.
Yeah.
But thank you.
You're welcome. I would, if there's no items of new business, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss a personnel matter.
So moved.
All in favor?
They're gonna fire me.